Panthers.
Black Panthers.
The Black Panther Party.
Black Panther movement.
The Black Panthers were absolutely unique.
Being black in America meant that you didn't walk down the street with the same sense of safety and the sense of privilege as a white person. Attack dogs, fire hoses.
Police jump on you, beat you up, put the gun at your head. This is what we were going through on a daily basis.
We stand on the eve of a black revolution, brothers.
Now we have voices within the community that we're not going to continue to turn the other cheek.
We want black power. We want black power.
The Second Amendment guarantees a citizen a right to bear arms on public property.
We're going to carry our guns and we're going to follow the police. We're going to maintain a legal distance, ready to throw down if necessary.
They were a group of revolutionaries formed in the middle of the turbulent 1960s. They were ultra-nationalists, socialists, and radical. Nearly 50 years ago, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense started out as a small group of black men who wanted to crack down on police brutality in Oakland, California. They did that by legally arming themselves and following police around the city. Within a few short years, the Black Panthers would grow from a local to a national movement and become players in the fight for civil rights, calling for a systematic revolution. The Black Panthers also had their own sense of style, helping make afros, berets, dashikis, and leather jackets part of popular culture. They promoted the idea that black is beautiful. They ran service programs in their communities, including serving breakfast to kids, and defied gender roles by placing women in positions of leadership. But the Panthers also gained a reputation for violence and criminal behavior that eventually contributed to the group's demise. It's all part of the Panthers' complicated legacy, which is the focus of the documentary clip you just watched, that we are featuring as part of our celebration of Black History Month. The Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution, premiered at Sundance last year and makes its debut on PBS's Independent Lens tomorrow night on 13. Joining me now to talk about all of this with more on the Black Panthers' legacy and his documentary, as we said, The Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution, is Emmy Award-winning filmmaker Stanley Nelson. Stanley, it's nice to meet you and to have you here with us. Let me ask you about your first awareness of the Black Panthers and what it suggested to you as a young man.
Well, I was about 15 when the Panthers came into being. I was living in New York City, and all of a sudden, on the news, there was this group that was defying everything that we knew. They were not nonviolent. They were carrying guns. And they also had this look. They looked so cool. And so I, like so many people, was fascinated by the Panthers.
You talk about in the documentary the various faces, if you will, of the Panthers. You and I will remember, we're of the same age, you and I will remember that they were oftentimes referred to as perpetrators of violence, sometimes referred to as perpetrators of positive social change. Those sound like they're at opposite ends of the spectrum. Were they that simple in terms of who they were?
I think the Panthers were very, very complicated. They were a very, very complicated group. And it differed from city to city, who the Panthers were. But I also think one of the things that's happened is we've come to think of the Panthers in the present very differently than they were thought of back then in the late 60s. I think, they were much more accepted in the late 60s. They were on the news every night. As you see in the film, the Panthers will be speaking. And 50, 60, 70, 80% of the audience might be white, and so the Panthers were much more, they weren't mainstream, but they were much more part of this general movement that was happening in the country back then than we think of them now.
During your journey as a filmmaker here, did you learn things about the Panthers that surprised you, things that you didn't know about beforehand?
Sure, I think there was so much that I learned. The film took about 7 years to make, and so as we're going, we learned so much about the Panthers. I think one of the things that you see in the film is how young the Panthers were. And we forget that these were they were under 20 years old. They were teenagers. Basically, the Panthers were teenagers. I think another thing that comes through so strikingly is women's role in the Panthers. As someone says in the film, by the early 70s, the Black Panthers were majority women, which is, not the image that you think of when you see the Panthers.
You also get a sense from watching this, and you talk about in the film, at how adept some of these young men and women, the leaders of the party, were at utilizing the media.
Yeah.
Was that surprising to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think how intentionally they use the media. That the Panthers, just by their very look, I mean, that was intentional. The look was supposed to be something that was very different from Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement in general. It was a look of youth. The leather jackets, the afros, the berets, the sunglasses. And part of that was to say, to young people, look, here we are. And we're cool. And for young people, it's like, oh my God, this isn't this kind of church-based movement that we had been used to saying. It was a break from, in a lot of ways, from the traditional civil rights movement.
And you look at the traditional civil rights movement, you look at Dr. King and his message of nonviolent change. And then you juxtapose the Panthers standing there with loaded guns.
Right.
As he mentioned, they found a loophole in the law in Oakland, California that said you could carry a weapon, loaded weapon, as long as you carried it openly.
Right.
So all of a sudden you have
right.
the shots of them standing with loaded guns. And I wonder, how did people like Dr. King and the leaders of the nonviolent civil rights movement, how did they view the Panthers, do you think?
Well, I think there were a lot of people who viewed the Panthers as very threatening. This was very different. But one of the most amazing things for us in making the film is we talk about Dr. King's murder and his death, and that was one of the real times that we saw the Panthers who we were interviewing get really choked up, about King's death. And one of the things that they say that was really striking is that one guy tells us how King's murder made him now join the Panthers. He was like, we've tried nonviolence. And you've killed the Prince of Nonviolence. So he goes out and joins the Panthers. So I think the Panthers, although in some ways they were, in opposition, it was this oppositional thing between them and the traditional civil rights movement, the Panthers really did respect and love what Martin Luther King was doing. They just had a different tact.
And and you mentioned this, that the violence that became part of their identity. You and I were talking beforehand. I was in New Haven in 1970 when the Black Panther trial was taking place. Bobby Seale, we were all on the green in New Haven. It was very peaceful. But it was a sort of a transition from that early 60s to there. So my question to you is when you come away from the 7-year project and all the work you've done on this, what do you see as the enduring legacy of the Panthers?
Well, I think that the Panthers are really and can really be an inspiration. There's a photo early in the film, and it's 5 guys standing out on a lawn. It's Bobby Seale and Huey Newton, Little Bobby Hutton, Big Man Howard, and one of the Fortes. And at that point, that was the only people who were in the Panther Party. That was it. These 5 guys. And here we are 50 years later still talking about them. They started out from nothing, and I think their legacy is one of organizing and taking the media and starting a movement and saying, really, it was a do-it-yourself piece. I mean, they had a huge breakfast program all across the country, and they basically said, well, nobody's feeding kids breakfast before school. Let's do it.
They're feeding 20,000 meals. It's
20,000 meals a week. Yeah.
It's a fascinating film. I find it fascinating because I lived through it. I think anybody will find it fascinating because of the historical journey and the stories that you tell. Stanley Nelson, you do such a wonderful job on your films. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Good. And to find out more about the Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution, and when it's airing, head over to 13.org.
We made mistakes. We charged ahead too fast and were too arrogant sometimes. We certainly underestimated the police and the government in terms of the response to the Black Panther Party. But I think what remains true, the central guiding principle was an undying love for the people.